So my name is Nicole Paget. I'm actually out of Lethbridge in the southern part of the province. I'm a safety codes officer, and I've been on the board of directors with the Alberta Onsite Wastewater Management Association for many years. So we get to work with lots of contractors and owners, and so really enjoy these opportunities, sharing some education and welcome your questions as well as we move through our webinar tonight. So tonight, we're going to do a high-level review of what is a septic system, how does it work, where can you find it, and then kind of break down the functions, initial treatment within the tank, and soil-based treatment as well. So we'll go through those components. We're also going to look at some of the regulations. So who's allowed to do what kind of work? How do we get to what kind of documentation do we need? How do we use our septic system? And what does maintenance of that look like? Or some troubleshooting things that we might run into years as we use our system. So again, we'll take questions. A lot of the information will kind of build on each other. So if there are any questions as we go, you can throw them out there, or we definitely will have time at the end to take those questions as well. So starting at the beginning, what is a private septic system? So it's the collection and treatment of wastewater that's generated by a development that isn't connected to a municipal system or a big pipe, some people might call it. So that looks like a lot of different things. It might be a holding tank where it's then pumped out and hauled off-site for treatment, or it could be a soil-based system that's going to be treating your sewage right on your property. Wastewater that different types of wastewater is human and animal waste, and also household wastewater. So we can design and have systems for all different types of use, whether it's industrial, restaurants, truck stops, work camps, things like that. But tonight we're specifically going to be looking at residential use, single family properties, and what that looks like for your family. So the goal of sewage treatment is a few things. So we don't want to create any risks to human health. We want to minimize the environmental impact, so on our soils as well as our surface waters, and overall that the environment is not harmed. We're dealing with aquifers, which is a source of water, people using wells and things like that. So understanding private sewage and ensuring that it's dealt with properly and responsibly and maintaining your system, it is a big responsibility. We're dealing with, again, long-term health and the environment, some of which aren't things that are easily corrected. So when we're dealing with construction of our house, there's some mistakes that we can make that we can just redo or cover up. But with our private sewage system, that's a very different ball of wax. So we really appreciate everyone taking the opportunity to educate yourselves and understand more about how that works and how to manage that on our own properties. So what is wastewater? Often we hear terms black water and gray water. Both of those actually require treatment by your septic system. Gray water is often referred to, that's wastewater from your bathroom. So showers, your sinks, laundry, things like that. And then black water would be the sewage from the toilets, and waste from the kitchen, greases and oils, things like that. So gray water, often people think that we can recycle that as in like use it on the garden for watering the garden. However, that's not the case. Both black water and gray water contain bacteria loads that have to be treated. We sometimes in the inspection world, we see people using that to, again, water their vegetable garden, and that's not allowed. People can get sick, and again, there's bacteria in both black and gray water treatment that require the correct treatment before it can be potable or consumed by humans to prevent any kind of pathogens and illness. So how to find your septic system? There's definitely several options. So your home could have some as-built drawings or possibly a home inspection. Those aren't always the most reliable source. Sometimes the drawings, the construction drawings for your home may not include that, and home inspections are changing over the years. That's definitely evolving a bit, but generally they're not looking at the septic system as part of the construction and operation of the home. It's primarily focused on the house, the structure itself. So those aren't always a reliable source. You can look in your yard for physical evidence. So you're looking for septic tank lids. We'll see some pictures later on, inspection port covers, pipes, caps that you can see from the surface. All of those are evidence of and different components of your septic system. You can also get the documentation from a few different sources. So a permitting agency may have record for your property of when the system was installed, your municipality possibly. About 20 years the last 20 years, technology has improved, obviously. So that has really affected record management. So if we're going back further than that, it can be really difficult to access or find the history of your property or those files, specifically talking about the record of permits. About 25 years ago, Alberta Municipal Affairs took care of permitting for the province. They had very limited inspectors. A lot of permits weren't obtained, and again, the documentation at that point was very different. So again, depending on the age of your system, obtaining those records from those different avenues may be very difficult to do. Alberta Safety Codes Authority is an organization part of the Safety Codes Council in Alberta, and they take care of all the areas that aren't accredited, it's called in the province. So if there aren't safety code officers that work directly for the municipality, or they're not contracted with one specific permitting company, it's likely an unaccredited area. And so you can contact them for records of permits as well as an avenue. And you can also reach out to a pumper or any kind of septic maintenance provider, and they can assist you with any kind of investigation to, again, kind of start from the beginning and find out, where is my septic system? What do I have here? What am I working with? In Alberta, actually 1 in 5 Albertans have an on-site septic system, and 30 million gallons a day of sewage is treated by on-site private septic systems in Alberta. So we have regulations and rules, codes that have to be followed, and the maintenance of those systems plays a very big role, because that's a big risk. That's a lot of effluent that's treated every day that we're relying on the soil to treat appropriately. Not everybody is connected to big pipe or municipal systems where you can kind of flush it and forget it. When it's on your property, you need to flush it and continue to deal with it. So it is important to understand how systems work, and it's actually quite a large population. Alberta rely on on-site systems. So how does it all work? So this is just a screenshot showing kind of the the water cycle in a sense. So we have your home, and from your house, your sewage or effluent goes into your septic tank. And here in this photo, we're looking at a treatment field in the soil. We used to, and a lot of people feel that uh, the sewage that goes into the ground is mostly dealt with through evaporation, but actually only about 5% of the sewage evaporates. The rest of it relies on the soil to be treated appropriately. So again, underlining the importance of proper designs and installations and maintenance, because the majority of it relies on the soil in order for that appropriate treatment to take place. So in the photo here, we see the drain field. The sewage would be going down into those laterals that we see and then going down through the soil. We need 5 feet of good soil or appropriate soil in order to treat the effluent before it can hit the water table and be considered potable or safe for use. So under that, we can see the mound there, and that's depicting underground aquifer. If the sewage is not treated properly, it doesn't dilute. It doesn't dilute that well. It actually forms a narrow plume in that aquifer and will follow it along and travel within the aquifer until it finds another water source. So in the photo here, we're looking at a well potentially. So if the sewage we're putting in the ground, we're not treating it properly, and it doesn't have the right amount of soil to achieve that treatment, it can potentially contaminate underground aquifers, and now even your own well or your neighbor's well, or 10 miles down the road, someone else is now drawing that back up in order to use that in their house, and again, then ingesting and using that contaminated water source. So that's the sort of cycle that we're looking at. And again, the importance of the soil, understanding the soils, understanding how it works, and maintaining our systems, make sure that we're managing our own water cycle on our properties in a responsible and a safe manner. So first of all, we're going to look at a septic tank. So what is the point of the septic tank? What is its job? It provides the initial separation. So we have lighter things like fats, oils, and grease that float to the top within our septic tank, and then heavy organics settle to the bottom. In the middle, we have, it's called the clear zone, but it's not clear. It's still a septic tank. And that's what's going to go over into our field. We've got a photo of that in the next slide here. So this, when we have that separation just within a septic tank, that's referred to primary strength effluent. So later we're going to be referring back to that. So our primary treated effluent is just our residential strength effluent that can go directly into the soil. A septic tank is not a holding tank. So both of them are vessels that can be buried into the ground. The septic tank, again, we'll see a photo here in our next slide, kind of depicting what we discussed there. So we have the sewage and the effluent going into the inlet there on the left, and then our separation begins. So our top layer there, the scum layer, is our lighter things like our fats, oils, and greases. The sludge and the organics that settles to the bottom, and we have that open space or that clear zone. In this photo, it's a pretty blue, but in your septic tank, it's not. And it travels over into our secondary compartment before then the outlet on the very right end of the tank going out into our treatment, our soil-based treatment, whatever that might be. Our holding tank is the tank, everything goes in there and it just stays there. There'll be some separation that occurs again naturally here, but it's not going anywhere to be treated. We have a vacuum truck that comes out and will suck out that tank, and it'll haul it off site for treatment an appropriate facility. So the septic tank and the holding tank are two different things. The holding tank does just exactly what it says. It just holds that effluent and it needs to be sucked out and disposed of properly. Our septic tank is the initial part of our treatment. So it has an important job. And again, just providing those initial separations for us. Advanced treatment units, this is another example of an initial treatment. So again, kind of step one in our septic system. There are multiple different kinds of treatment units. We've got some here, textile filter, aeration. We'll look at a few kind of cross sections of some. This is a newer technology. The septic tank that we were discussing previously, that's an old technology, even dating back to the Roman days. But it still works and it still does its job. So advanced treatment units definitely it continues to evolve and advance. These are certified units. And if we think about a municipal your water treatment plant, same thing, same idea, not same thing, but same idea, but just for your own property, fits on your lot. And again, it's a manufactured approved system. So this one here that we're looking at, it's an aerobic treatment unit. So an example of a treatment plant. Upstream of this, so before we get to this treatment unit, we have to have a trash tank because not everything's supposed to be flushed. And if it's not supposed to be flushed, it can't make its way in here by accident. So before we can install this, we have a trash tank upstream from this. This aerobic treatment unit we can think of as a septic tank, but we're adding air to it. So in our septic tank, that's an anaerobic environment. So there's no oxygen, and the bacteria in there is bacteria that doesn't rely on oxygen. Whereas here, we're adding oxygen and that helps the bacteria and it treats the sewage better. So in the center here, we've got just the aeration device, and then it flows over into the second compartment before it goes out into our field. So again, just an example of a treatment plant that may be part of your design or that you may have on your property. Another example is an attached growth system. So very similar in that we have the aerator there as well, but then it's labeled here the BAT, the BAT media. The only difference there is that we have the media inside of this one, which helps the bacteria adhere to, and it helps provide additional surface area to provide treatment. And again, providing us a higher quality of effluent to be then treated by our soil component. And again, textile package plant. So just another example of package treatment plant that is for residential use. It has a few more pieces and components, but it provides a very similar function. It just depends on your supplier and what brand basically that they carry. And again, all of these are certified units approved for use in Alberta, and it's just dependent on your supplier and what they're carrying. But all at the end of the day, their advanced treatment unit, just providing better quality of effluent than when we were looking at just the septic tank and just the natural separation that occurs. We can see that in the photo here. So on the left, the brown jar is what would go out to the field from our septic tank when it was referred to as the clear zone, which as you can see is not that clear, but that's the quality of effluent that will then be treated in the soil within our septic system. In the right, the much clearer jar is the quality of effluent that will come from an advanced treatment, from packaged treatment plants. So Again, we still don't want to drink it, but it's definitely cleaner and a higher quality of sewage that's then going out to our treatment component. Oops. Our final treatment, so we had our initial treatment with the different tanks treatment plants, and the final treatment, our soil-based system. So the final treatment of effluent or sewage is going to take place in the soil. The soil treats the effluent physically, chemically, and biologically. The final component is always going to be the soil. So it's kind of one of those things that's out of sight, out of mind, but very interesting, the capacity of the soil and the ability to remove dangerous pathogens and nitrates to then ensure that what's going back into our groundwater is safe and it's potable and we're able to use it again. So it's all that final components and that cleaning up and making that safe again is all done by the soil. So it's very, very interesting, and really, as we continue to discuss this, the soil-based component, the importance of our site evaluations and our designs, we're far from the days of burying the bus in the backyard or whatever it is. And science has improved in our understanding of septic systems, and what the soil does for us has changed a lot even over the last 15, 20 years. So it really underscores the importance of proper site evaluations and having the right people involved when you're putting in a new system or when you're moving on to a property with an existing system, understanding how that works and the respect for it to maintain that in a proper way. Here in this photo, we're looking at a lateral. So it's those fingers, trenches in the ground. So we've got a chamber that we're seeing here, and we've got the header along the bottom of the photo. Under that chamber, there may be piping, there may not be. There's different ways of using that, but this is just an example of a treatment field. So again, it's going in the ground. When that's backfilled, it'll be level and not visible. There's different kinds of soil-based treatment systems, so we're going to discuss those here further. These are referred to as weeping lateral, dispersal trenches, septic field. So all just different verbiage for the same thing that we're seeing here in the photo. Those laterals, there are requirements for how deep they can be and how far apart they need to be. They have to be a minimum of 3 feet apart, each lateral, and they cannot be deeper than 3 feet. Once it gets deeper than that, we're not achieving treatment, and a lot of different things happen then. But we have the minimum 3 feet apart and maximum depth of 3 feet that those trenches can be. So again, in this drawing here, we've got our chambers. The photo itself is a little misleading. Here we have 2 very short laterals. That's not realistic. We will have more than 2, and they'll likely be much longer than what we see here, but at least we can use our imagination and get an idea. We have our house, our septic tank, and then again, the header. In this photo here, we have what's called a distribution box, just making sure that the sewage coming out from the tank is going to be dispersed evenly along all those laterals. And then in the other photo, we have pipe and rock. So we've got washed rock that we're using, perforated pipe, and then may not be able to see it in the photo, but just a thin layer of a geotextile fabric on top of that. So both of these options are treatment fields. You can use chamber or the washed rock and pipe. And again, both of these, when they're all installed, will just be level with the ground. They're underground. You can't see them. They're not visible in your yard. So another example of soil-based treatment, our final treatment, is a treatment mound. In our photo here on the right, this was taken from an AOWMA installation day. So we host and provide different site training days and hands-on training for different contractors and installers. In this photo here, you may be able to see the water shooting up. So this is the squirt test. Once the pump is turned on, they're making sure that the height that's coming out from each hole in that pipe is going to be even from one end to the other. Again, making sure that when that system is in use, that the effluent and the sewage is being spread out evenly across that entire system. So the treatment mound is an option when we're dealing with a shallow water table. It's built on the surface of the ground. So previously we were looking at our laterals that are dug into the ground, maximum of 3 feet deep. The mound is built on top of the ground. We have 12 feet of washed concrete, 12 feet, sorry, 12 inches of washed concrete sand. So again, very prescriptive as to the materials that we need to use here. And again, we also use this type of system where we don't have that 5 feet of separation between our laterals and any water table. Treatment mound requires 3 feet. You can also have this system installed on less than that, even 12 inches, as long as you have 1 foot of usable or good soil. You can install a treatment mound. It's just that sand layer will end up being thicker than 12 inches. And so again, we have our wash sand, which you can see in the picture, our home septic tank going out to our field, our system. And then we've got the sand depicted, washed rock, our laterals, our fabric, and then a specific type of soil on top of that. So a lot of components here, and it provides options for treatment in areas where we don't have enough good soil that we can be using, or where we're dealing with higher water tables and things like that. So it definitely is a more expensive system because we're dealing with a lot more product here. Washed concrete sand can get very pricey, again, depending on where you're at in the province and what you have available. But sometimes there is no other option except for the treatment mound and a specific design parameters that need to be used for that. Another example is called an LFH at grade. So as we can see from the photos here, we're dealing with forested areas. So these are very useful in areas where there is a lot of dense trees, or maybe a lot of trees on your property that you don't want to cut down and things like that. Down in the south part of the province, we don't have a lot of trees, but in the Crow's Nest Pass, actually, we've seen more of these being installed when we're dealing with forested areas, and it's a really great option. So here we're looking at a sewage treatment plant. So some of those examples that we went through previously, this type of system requires that. It's not an option as we can in other systems, but it requires a treatment plant so that we're dealing with a better quality of sewage. And then the pipe snakes through the trees. We have chambers on top here in the middle picture. And then in the third one, it's covered in mulch, and it ends up becoming part of the forest floor. So this was actually something that was, I think in the last 10 years, it was a study that the U of C was doing and that AOWMA was involved in as well. And so this type of system became approved. Previously, it would have to be approved under a variance or a special approval for that site. But now it's a approved system that's part of our code. And an open discharge. So an open discharge, you require a minimum of 10 acres. And in the middle of that, you have basically a 30-foot circle where the effluent then is just dispersed on the surface. It's just discharged right on the surface. It's common in a lot of rural areas where you're dealing with large parcels of land, you don't have a lot of neighbors, things like that. They're definitely cheaper to install, but again, they come with a smell. So it just depends on your situation and what you're looking for. But definitely common as well, but you're just dealing with larger areas of land in order for this system to be a viable option. So we've been through our initial and our final treatment components. We're just going to look into the regulations a little bit and understand where all the rules come from, how that works. Everybody's favorite part. So the current standard that we're operating under right now is the 2021 Alberta Private Sewage Standard of Practice. So this is the code book, essentially. This is where it lays out what our minimum setbacks are, what types of systems we can use on different soils, things like that. And then after that, we have the Alberta Private Sewage Regulation. This basically just points to the code book as the authority to set those rules and regulations. The permit regulation, this provides us guidelines and the requirements for who can take out a permit, when do I need a permit? So if I'm adding to my electrical system, adding some outlets, adding a new bathroom, I need a permit. And for private sewage here tonight, if we're replacing our septic tank, we require a permit for that. So those are what's laid out in the permit regulation. It sets those parameters as to when do I need a permit and who can take one out. The Safety Codes Act is the overarching piece of legislation. This speaks to all the different roles in this industry. So it speaks to government, it speaks to municipalities, safety codes officers and their authority and limitations, homeowners, contractors. So everybody has a role to play within the industry, and it's the Safety Codes Act that lays out the roles and responsibilities and the authorities and limitations of each party. This is also where fines are introduced. So if there's a contravention of the act, there are fines listed within the Safety Codes Act for penalties for that. So that's the different regulations. The Alberta Public Health Act, we also deal with from time to time. The Alberta Health can investigate different situations. If it's rental properties and there's issues with wastewater and how it's being managed, if there's impact to neighbors or public nuisances, things like that, Alberta Health may get involved and provide investigations under their own acts and regulations that they have. So we don't deal with them a lot, but it does happen, and they do have a role as well within the wastewater industry. The regulations, so that's dealing with, as I mentioned, the setbacks that we're looking at, the vertical separation. So we've talked about 5 feet for a treatment field or 3 feet for a mound, different restricting soil conditions, minimum septic tank size. So I have a 2-bedroom house, how big of a tank do I need? Or I have a 5-bedroom house, what size of septic tank do I need? All of that is laid out in the regulations and the codes that we abide by, what we can and can't do with different types of soils. This is actually, so the Alberta Private Sewage Standard of Practice, our code, is available online for free. It's a free download that anybody can obtain for some nice bedtime reading. Our setback distances. So again, as mentioned, these are prescribed within our code, our standard of practice. Critically looking at things, again, setbacks from water sources, or courses. So that would include a cistern possibly that you have on site, a well, possibly a seasonal water course. So if in the spring there's areas of the property that fill with water, or if it's running water, we're near a stream or a river, things like that, and any other site constraints. So we'll discuss that more as we get into the evaluation of your property, but everything on the property is looked at, even the neighboring property perhaps, and where its well might be. Those are all things that are evaluated. Again, we're not just looking at how many bedrooms do I have? I need 200 feet then. We're looking at the entire property and what components may impact or interfere with the installation of a system and help us determine where it can go or what type of system we're looking at. So our design and installation, there is very in-depth. I mean, there's an 8-day training course from AOWMA that provides certification to persons to have a certificate of competency or to become a certified installer. So we can definitely talk about the design and installation of systems at great length. We won't do that tonight. We'll try and have a 30,000 view of systems and the design, who can install it, and not just certified contractors, but also homeowners. So under the Safety Codes Act and the permit regulations, it notes and provides us in Alberta, if it's our own residence and we're living in it, then we have the ability to install and take out the permit for our septic system. So you definitely have that right and that ability. Again, as we continue to discuss this further this evening, we can understand why there might be a separate certification for it and what's required for that. So when we're looking to reach out to a professional, again, we're looking to not just necessarily a contractor, but specifically somebody who holds a certificate of competency, who is a private sewage certified installer. So the design and installation, there's a variety of steps, which we'll go into a little bit here. So our site evaluation, which we touched on, our wastewater flows. So what kind of volume are we dealing with? The design, the permit, and then the approval of that design. So in order to install a system, we require a permit from the appropriate authority, whether that's right from the municipality or from an agency. That design is submitted, it's reviewed to make sure that at least what we can see on paper adds up and meets the code. The setbacks are met, things like that. If there's any kind of red flags or anything that was missed in the calculations. Once that's approved, then a permit is issued. The permit is required before the installation takes place. So the permit is what permits you to go ahead and carry on with that project, with the installation of your system. Once it's installed or during the installation process, a safety codes officer will come out to site to inspect the system. Because there is a lot of steps we talked about tanks and treatment units, soil-based components that have a variety of steps in it. So ideally, we want to see that system while it's open and uncovered, and then we'll look at various components based on what we can see at that time of inspection. And then once that's all completed and backfilled, it's ready for use and handed over to the owner. So we'll start at the beginning and discuss a little more in depth the design and installation. So with our site evaluation, we're looking at the capability of the site. So again, we talked about any limiting factors on the property, the water source, even the slope and grade of the property impacts the system or where it can go or where it should go. Oftentimes we find that we focus so much on the dwelling, which is very important, of course. And then the septic system becomes an afterthought, and where maybe the best soil that we could have put a septic system, that's now where the house is going to go. So it's important for these initial steps and your on-site system, if you're looking at a new property where you're developing and building a new house, that the septic system is part of that initial property evaluation and part of your consideration and thought process versus, we have everything picked out and the cabinets and the flooring and all of that, and the septic system is oh yeah, right, we need to figure that out. It is an important step to understand the property, what can and can't we do, what limiting factors are we dealing with. And again, as we've talked about the soil, we can't make the soil fit to what we want or what budget we have or where we think the best spot is. The soil is the one that's in the driver's seat, and we need to adapt and design systems that meet the soil that we're dealing with in that area. So what are we looking for in the soil? Water that goes into the ground will eventually make its way to a water source. So we have to have that treated before it reaches the aquifer or any other water body. And it has to retain in the soil for a certain number of days in order to achieve that treatment as well. We talked about, so 5 feet is the primary treated effluent. And we talked about that initially. So we're dealing with a treatment field. We need at least 5 feet of soil to provide the correct amount of treatment before we can before it can hit return to a water source. Secondary treated effluent is what we were talking about with the treatment plant or the bottom of the mound. The mound is like a homemade treatment plant. So that provides, again, a greater treatment. If we remember the picture of the 2 beakers there, so we have a kind of a better quality of effluent. So that's a secondary treated effluent, and in that case, we rely on less soil because we're dealing with a better product in the first place. And again, we need that effluent to stay in the soil for 7 days before it can reach any kind of water source. So how quickly the sewage is going to move through the soil is important to understand, and make sure that we understand what soil we're dealing with to make sure we have that right retention time, because we can't have it moving too quickly through the soil because it's not going to achieve the treatment and be safe. The design and installation. So a certified designer or contractor, they're going to be looking at the flow. So what kind of volume are we dealing with? And also they're looking at your lifestyle. What kind of hobbies do you enjoy? And what kind of things are you going to be doing on the property and within your home? Are you entertaining often? Things like that, where they want to have an understanding of what kind of flow and the frequency that we're going to be dealing with. They're going to put that all together into a design. And again, that design is what's used for a permit application then. So again, starting with the soil, once we know what the soil is, then we base our design off of the soil. If the soil is wrong and we don't have a good understanding of soil and we're not conducting that site evaluation appropriately, we may be installing a system much bigger than we need, or worse, installing a system that's smaller than we need and possibly end up looking at a system failure. So when we're dealing with $20,000, $30,000, $50,000 of an investment into an on-site system, we want to make sure that it works and that we're treating that investment properly from the start, that we're having an adequate design done up from the start. The owner's responsibility. So the owner's responsible under the Safety Codes Act is responsible for the thing. They is how they term it. But basically, the owner is responsible for the operation and maintenance of that system. So if the design is created for a 3-bedroom home and the other components that we're looking at, and we add on a suite in the garage and add another 2 bedrooms, then we're no longer operating within the design parameters that we had. So the owner is responsible for the maintenance of the system and again, operating within those boundaries of which it was designed to do. The owner's manual. So this is an example of an owner's manual. Some contractors have their own format that they may put together, but an owner's manual should be handed off to the owner to provide that information so you know what those boundaries are and what the system was designed to do and how to operate and maintain it in an appropriate way. So using your septic system, we hear a lot about low flush fixtures. There's no credit given to your design because you're dealing with low flush fixtures, because when we have less water in the toilet bowl, for example, we have a higher strength sewage that we're dealing with now because there's less dilution. Water conservation isn't as important to our septic system unless we're dealing with a holding tank where we're paying to have somebody come and pump it out. Then we're dealing with costs. So you may want to have low flow fixtures and conserve more water, but when we're dealing with soil-based treatment components, water conservation isn't necessarily as much of a priority because it's a bit of a trade-off there when we're then dealing with higher strength effluent. What are things that we can do just in our day-to-day routines to help our septic system manage our use? So instead of having one big laundry day, we might look at spreading that out over the course of the week so that we're not dousing and overloading our system on one day, but it's a constant and a consistent usage throughout the week. Also, things like using too much water or, as we mentioned, too little water, resulting in higher strength wastewater. So again, being mindful of what we're doing and again, not flushing and forgetting it, but being mindful of what we're doing and what we're putting out to the soil and expecting it to do for us. So just that awareness again of how your system works and how to use it can help preserve the longevity of your investment. So we've talked about what is a septic system, a little bit about designing it. So we're going to get into maintenance of it. So caring for your septic system. Additives and starters and feeders are not required. So we used to hear all the time to throw a dead chicken in the tank, and that's the starter that you need to get everything going, but that's not actually the case, not recommended. All the bacteria that we need to start doing providing treatment is in the sewage itself. So we don't need additives and starters. That is the effluent itself and the sewage that we're dealing with. Things like bleach and harsh cleaners, use them in moderation. If you're the type of person who needs everything to be sparkling and squeaky clean and lemon fresh all the time, maybe rural life isn't for you. When we think of the job of these cleaners, it's to kill bacteria. So when we're putting a lot of that and using a lot of that into our septic system, it's doing its job by killing bacteria, but that bacteria we need in order to help provide treatment. So things to be mindful even when we're purchasing cleaners for our homes. Organic waste, so things that don't decompose, we don't want to put into our septic system or down the drain. We can think of alternatives, options like composting, again, draining our fats into tinfoil and letting it cool and throwing that in the garbage, not putting those things down the drain. The garburator is a big one. It's a big convenience that in city life, again, we get really accustomed to, and it's really handy to have. But when we're not just flushing and forgetting it, all of that organic material takes a toll on our system. So it'll fill up our septic tank quicker, and it'll end up, it increases the organic load that we're needing the soil to digest. So it can clog up our system a lot quicker. So actually, if you're installing a garburator, your septic tank and your septic field will need to be increased in size to accommodate for that. So again, it's a very small thing that we don't even think about, but it has a big impact on the design of a system. So in the septic world, we don't recommend them. If you have one, stop using it. It's just, it does things to be mindful of. It impacts the system in a big way. And things to keep out. So paper towels, wipes, condoms, even if they say they're flushable, we don't want them in the septic system. It doesn't decompose, and it's going to clog up our system, or it's going to get caught in the pump, things like that, and it's going to be costly for maintenance. The only thing that should be going in your septic system are things that come out of your body and toilet paper. Those are the things that can go in your system. Other than that, we want to avoid flushing those things down the drain. We don't need to use like the see-through RV safe toilet paper, whatever it might be. But we also maybe don't need the 4-ply Bear approved toilet paper. Again, it needs to be able to break down in our septic tank. So things to be mindful of when we're making choices for our home and when we're being mindful about the maintenance of our systems. Water conservation, again, like we talked about, it's important, but it's not critical when we're dealing with a septic system. If we think back to one of our initial photos of the home, the septic field, and then the treatment we get before it comes back up in our well, that water cycle is what we're using. So water conservation isn't necessarily as important because it's all working through the cycle there and being recycled. So we don't necessarily need to be as aware of it. Again, using too little water can result in a higher strength effluent, but again, too much water and we can overload the system. So the things that we talked about, maybe spreading out your laundry days, things like that. Also looking at the discharge from maybe water softeners. Those people who are installing these for us should not be attaching them to our septic system. They should be pumped out elsewhere. So a French drain or a dry well is where those want to be discharged. We don't want that to be going into the septic system and again, overloading our system. We want to make sure that it's not backwashing more than it needs to be. So looking at the manufacturer's specifications, sometimes when they're installed, they're just installed and away we go, and it's kind of set to a higher setting. So we can look at that and make sure that it's not backwashing more frequently than it needs to. And again, things to keep out of your septic system. So because it's called flushable, just because it goes down the toilet doesn't mean it should. So because it can be flushed, it's flushable, but it doesn't mean it should be. So any feminine products, paper towel, flushable wipes, condoms, things that should not be in your septic system. As well, plastic or inorganic items, again, thinking about composting rather than carburetors, coffee grounds, animal fats, solid waste. We don't want those things going down the drain. Again, if it doesn't come out of you, it doesn't belong in there. Solvents, paints, silicone, construction waste, again, things that we don't want going down into the drain. Those are things that the soil cannot and will not treat for us. It'll end up plugging up the soil and result in failure over time. Fuels, oils, all of that kind of stuff. Our garage drains and perimeter drains, we don't want going into the septic system. Not only is it adding from the garage anyways, possibly the oils and things that we don't want in there, and overloading the system with all the surface drainage. But if our system backs up, it's going to back up into those, and then your entire perimeter of your house will have sewage and you can't clean that out. So again, those are things that we're not adding into the system. They are dealt with and managed separately. So why should you care? Well, as we mentioned, and as maybe you know yourself from past experience, the installation of a septic system is very expensive. Not only the appropriate products, but having professionals involved and having the right person out to do your soil evaluation and your design. It is it's an investment into your home. And when we're managing that and dealing with it properly, it increases the longevity of our system. So again, out of sight, out of mind, we spend so much time picking out maybe our paint colors and our siding and things like that. We put so much thought and effort into, and often we see the septic system there's very little regard or thought given to it. And by that point, the budget is thin. We spent all the money on the granite. And now what are we going to do with the toilets? And so it's something that we really need to be aware of and respect what it does for us. It's an essential service, and the ability to treat that ourselves on our own property and return safe water to the aquifers. We're not polluting our own well water, the neighbors. That's all things that your septic system should be doing. And when it's dealt with properly, your investment will last many, 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 many years, decades. It becomes an asset to your property. So resale, when you have those documents and when you have your records of maintenance, it can be part of an asset on your property and can prevent issues when it comes time to resale. And again, saves you money, again, because you're protecting it. It will be cheaper in the long run than running into issues and trying to diagnose or replace your system possibly. So safety when dealing with our septic tank. So maybe we're trying to maintain it or things aren't working properly. What do we do? We'll never, ever, ever, ever go into your septic tank. In order to enter a septic tank, there's specialized certification, equipment, masks, all those kinds of things that are required. So never ever enter a septic tank. Ensure that the lid is secured. So if it's not a concrete lid, the lid needs to be screwed down and secured. If not, again, it creates a very big risk and danger, and people have died simply from the lid not being secured and falling into a septic tank. So we want to maintain that. We want to deal with it properly, not having flammables in our system, preventing electric shock, things like that. So keeping all of those components of our system working properly helps us from a safety standpoint as well. The gases in a septic tank they will kill you. That's why we don't go into the septic tank. So hydrogen sulfide or H2S or sour gas, it will kill you. It kills the nerves in our nose, and so we can't smell it. It has no smell, and it is poisonous. Methane, so the natural gas in our house that we burn for heat, it's an asphyxiant. I can't say that word, so we'll just move on. But carbon monoxide, dioxide, it's all of those things are found in a septic tank and are deadly. So these are gases found in every single septic tank. And again, that's why we never want to go into a septic tank. You have professionals involved who have the training and the equipment and the personal protection to do that for us. Your septic system should have a filter. It's required in the last 20 plus years to have a filter in your septic tank. If you don't have one, you can put one in. It's easy to do. It helps filter out, again, anything that might make its way down the drain that shouldn't be there. So its job is to catch kind of those chunks that they don't make it out to the field. They don't, they can be filtered out and cleaned out easily. And again, this is part of your maintenance log. So cleaning out your filter and putting it back, and then keeping a log of that so you know how often or when it was done last or who did it last. A high level alarm. So again, in the last over 20 years, I believe it's been a requirement to have a high level alarm. Its job is to let you know when you're having troubles. So to warn you before you have sewage in the basement. And again, it can be installed at any time. So if you don't have one, you should get one and it can be installed. Same thing, we check our smoke alarms and make sure they're working. We want to check our high level alarm, make sure that it's working, that we can hear the alarm, make sure it's functioning. Because it is a very simple but an effective tool to help prevent any disasters when it comes to our septic system if we're encountering problems. So the maintaining your septic system and inspection. So this isn't like a safety codes officer coming to do a site inspection. This is a maintenance inspection. So it's something that gets serviced, again, cleaning out the filter, making sure the lids are secured. And again, some contractors have this as part of like a package. If you're working with one, that they come out and provide the maintenance for a certain period of time. And again, that should be recorded so you have a record of it. You know what's going on in this system, when it's been inspected, what took place, and then that can help down the road as well. If you run into issues, it can help with that diagnostic process to understand what may not be functioning properly. Again, the lids, so making sure that they're all secured. We talked about overloading or oversaturating the system. So this would be things like directing water away from the system. So our downspouts, things like that. We don't want to be adding extra water on top of our system. We don't want to drive or park on our septic field or our system. That not only compacts the soil, but it breaks the laterals and things that are underneath it as well. So we want to make sure that the septic system is in a place where we're not driving over it. If we have a big event at our property or a family wedding or reunion or something like that, again, that is cleared or fenced off so we don't have guests parking and driving over top of our septic field. And again, with the maintenance, making sure that we're repairing and replacing anything that's damaged. Sludge disposal. So we have an example of a vacuum truck here, suck truck. When you have the suck truck out, if it sounds like it's sucking gravel, it's potentially our concrete tank is starting to fail. So we might want to start saving for a new one. We've got just behind the cab there, the green portion is the discharge portion, and it works just like a vacuum in our house. However, we don't want to be standing in that area. It's quite odors and things like that. Vacuum trucks are limited to where they're allowed to dispose. So again, they come in, they suck out our tank, and away they go. It's not our problem. They have regulations as well that they need to abide by. So there's certain areas where they can dispose of the sewage, either at a sewage treatment lagoon or a facility, or they may have a license for land spreading through Alberta Health. Part of that license requires them to walk after they've spread. They have to walk the area and pick up anything that's not supposed to be in there. So again, anything that we're not supposed to be flushing down our system, they need to go and double check and make sure that that is cleaned up. So the rule of thumb for pumping our tank, our septic tank, is every 3 years, but you can have it pumped as frequent or not as you want. If they're not cleaned out regularly, it can end up causing issues for our system with blockages. So we do want to have our tank pumped. And again, rule of thumb is every 3 years, but of course depends on your usage and things like that. When to pump your tank. So we recommend in the spring or summer when possible, just because we want to keep the heat in the tank. So that again contributes to the bacteria and the separation there. So in the spring and summer, if we can, we don't need to scrub or disinfect a tank. When we have a pumper come out, they'll assess the scum and the sludge levels. Usually most will leave a couple inches of the sludge at the bottom of the tank, which assists in the bacteria recovery for it to then kind of start over and continue on with the cleaning of our effluent there in our initial treatment. Again, this is a good time to check out and see the baffle wall, what kind of condition it's in, the risers, all of those components. So when you have a pumper out, often they're a maintenance provider. Those are things that they can look at as part of their service. So again, maintaining your septic system, that's the tank portion. So how do we maintain the soil-based component of it? Again, we want to avoid compaction. So no vehicles, no parking, no livestock. We don't want to have our septic system in the corral with our horses, which maybe sounds crazy, but it happens quite a lot. Our landscape, so we want to maintain it with grass only. We don't want to be planting trees or shrubs on our mound or anything like that. And again, keeping the surface water diverted away from the system, so our downspouts, things like that. Any trees or shrubs that we're planting, we want to keep a safe distance away. So a rule of thumb, however far out the branches will spread, that's estimating how big their root ball will be. So again, we want to keep that away from the septic system so that those roots don't end up infiltrating our laterals and our pipes and things like that. So being aware of our landscaping decisions and when and where we're planting things. And yeah, not letting people drive over the system. They'll likely get stuck and it will ruin your system, and not a place for a vegetable garden, all of those things. So things to be aware of when we're making those decisions. Carriganas specifically can be quite common in rural areas. They're a good tree to have, but their roots can travel over 100 feet. So again, we want to keep those things in mind when we're making those choices, because they will infiltrate the system and kind of take over. Our grass, so we mentioned shallow root vegetation we want to have, or just grass over our treatment field, making sure the grass is maintained. So mowing it, but nothing more than a ride-on mower with turf tires. So again, part of the maintenance and how we're dealing with the soil and the compaction that we might be exposing it to. And again, avoiding over irrigating the field, so diverting extra moisture away from the treatment field. The maintenance logs, we talked about the owner's manual, and maintaining a log of any service or maintenance that was done. This, what was replaced, when it was replaced, who did that. That will help, again, possibly with diagnosing any potential issues you might run into down the road to help see what an issue with the system might be, or again, resale of your property. This is an asset when it comes to real estate and the sale of real properties, having this information available, knowing where your system is, what it was designed for, and how you've been caring for it. So again, our records that we're maintaining. So just same as the previous slide, who are we contacting? Who are we using for those services? Do we know where, do we know if a permit was obtained for the system? Do we know if it was inspected? When was the tank last pumped out? Those are things that we want to be aware of and involved in as the homeowner. Those are integral parts of our system. And again, ultimately your investment. This is an example of the maintenance log. So again, information that we can include in there as far as who did it and when. Troubleshooting. So every situation is going to be different. There's going to be different variables. Every system is different. So it is a case by case situation that we're going to be looking at. But so we're just going to discuss very, again, common high level things that we can evaluate. Common causes of system failures are the system being overloaded. So again, maybe it was designed for a 2-bedroom and now 15 years later, it's a 5-bedroom. Physical damage, so again, driving over the system, damage to the laterals, things like that. Biomat buildup, so possibly too many organics going out to the field and plugging it up. Possibly poor design and installation, so maybe it wasn't, the soils weren't evaluated properly from the very beginning. All of those types of things can be part of issues that we experience down the road when we're looking at what's going wrong. So we talked about what is a septic system, the design of it, maintenance of it, and we will carry on with a few more troubleshooting things. If our sewage is backing up in our building, it could be the result of roots clogging the pipes, which is what we see in the photo here. That lateral, that pipe is filled with roots. And so back to, again, being aware of what we're planting when we're landscaping and just being aware of the type of vegetation that we have on our property. And this can be a result of it. Possibly blockage in the plumbing, damage to the sewage line, excess water, maybe issues with our pump or our floats. Maybe our system is freezing, all type of issues that can be resulting in sewer backing up in our building. Excuse me. So what do we do about it? Some of the concerns, what we want to be concerned about, again, exposure to those hazardous gases, electrical hazards, dealing with the pathogens and viruses that we find in wastewater, damage to our appliances and our property walls, the growth of mold, things like that. So what should we do? Well, we want to be cautious when we enter the building. We want to have air circulation, so open windows to have air flowing. Do not continue to use toilets or sinks or running water. That should be an obvious one. We can pump the septic tank out, empty out the tank to see what's going on in the tank and what might, if there's any clogs or things like that, and clean and disinfect. So this is where we want to use bleaches and heavy cleaners. the floor, walls, ceilings. Again, we want to make sure everything is cleaned very thoroughly before moving on. If we have sewage surfacing in the yard, so in the picture there, you can see kind of a little swampy situation happening. There can be possible causes for that from, again, exit the system being overloaded, blockage in a certain area of the field. So perhaps it's now overloading another area and resulting in that sewage to surface on the ground. And again, this can be caused from improper design from the very beginning, failures with our pump or float, maybe again, system undersized, so maybe an issue with the design, or maybe our system has just come to the end of its lifespan. They can last for a very, very long time, especially when they're used and maintained and designed properly. But it is something that will need to be replaced eventually. So perhaps we have an older property that we've purchased and we don't know when this system was installed and we're dealing with something from many, many decades ago. It could just simply be that our system has failed and we need to look at a new options. Some of the concerns when it's surfacing in the yard, again, we're now have exposure to pathogens and virus, contamination of our water and soil. It attracts animals and pests, and again, exposure to those harmful and deadly gases. So what should we do to mitigate some of those risks? Again, we want to reduce our water use, restrict access to the area. Often if we have pets, that's seems like the places you don't want them to go is where they find to play first. So we want to restrict access to that area. Reach out to a professional, again, a certified person, call a vacuum truck to have your tank pumped out. And we want to be aware and make sure that anything that's surfacing in the yard is not traveling off of our property, traveling onto any neighboring properties. Sewage odor. So indoors, this can be caused from possibly backup. It may not even be visible, but it can back up into the trap in our bathtub, and maybe we don't even see it, but it's just backing up into that trap and producing an odor. The roof vent, it might be frozen closed. A dry plumbing trap, so possibly an unused jetted tub or a floor drain that's not used regularly. These can produce smells. Improper plumbing, and it can also be resulting from maybe sewage that has surfaced in the yard. So what do we do about those issues? Well, we can then check the roof vent. If we have traps that are not being used, we can add half a cup of linseed oil or just a vegetable oil to prevent the evaporation of water in those traps if they're not used frequently. Consult a plumber and again have a professional check our pump and clean out our septic tank. Sewage odor in the outdoors. So often a cause from this is, again, if it's maybe surfacing in the yard, but we don't have a proper lid on. So these are two photos. The one on the left, obviously not a proper lid. And then the second one, this person was having issues and they dropped a pump in and then just started discharging it onto their property. So lids like this, again, is where we want to be very aware of. These situations result in deaths, and it's very, very tragic and very preventable. So these are things we want to be aware of, but it could be resulting from, that could be the source of odor on our property. If our alarm has been activated, what could that be resulting from? Perhaps our pump is unplugged. We want to double check our breaker for the effluent pump, make sure that that's not tripped. Maybe the pump needs to be replaced. Perhaps the outlet is plugged or frozen. And again, maybe there's an influx of groundwater into our tank, so pump and inspect the tank. If the tank is going to back up, the alarm will go off as a warning for you to then take action and address. So those are some things that we can start with and investigate. When that happens, hopefully it doesn't happen, but if that happens, again, limit the water usage, look for any backup in the house, and again, check our breakers, our plugs, and consult with a professional. And that was the end of our riveting presentation. I know that's a lot of information and try to cover all the bases, but hopefully it provides everybody with at least some information or things to ask yourself or be aware of with your own system, or perhaps needing a new system or moving out to a rural area. So hopefully provide some tools for you and food for thought, if nothing else. So happy to take any questions or comments that anybody might have, or if there's anything you need repeated or want me to go back to any slides.
And feel free, everyone, to, if you have questions, to put them in the chat or to unmute yourself and then just ask them out loud if you'd like.
Hi, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Marta. Thank you so much. It was great. We are new homeowners, so lots of learned tonight. Question is, if we, let's say, issues emerged and now we are on a path of replacing a tank, are there any enforcement to update the better system, or per se, if something works, we just need to replace actually just a tank from concrete to like more reliable plastic, let's say? Are there any enforcement legally?
Like what do you need to be aware of in order to replace that?
No, there is like this saying that if, let's say, you have a pump out that's not anymore a go, you need to have a mount. So is that true? Is there any enforcement for that?
Well, I guess there's a few variables there. So first of all, if you have a septic tank and you're replacing it, just simply replacing it, we do want to look at the soil-based component, but it doesn't mean the entire system needs to be brought up to code. Your septic tank that you're replacing would need to meet the current standards. So the minimum size is 1,000 gallons. So it would, I mean, you can't often not even find one smaller. So you would need to make sure that that new septic tank meets the current code. It would have to make sure it has the alarm, things like that. But it doesn't mean that you need to change your entire system. Just that tank itself would need to meet the current code. There are other variables that can come into play with setbacks and things like that with subdivisions. So I guess I kind of just put a caveat with that there may be more involved there, but generally speaking, you should just be looking at the tank and making sure that meets code, but not that the entire system has to be updated.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, we have a question from Jane regarding checking proximity of downspouts. How close is a concern for a mound?
Yeah, great question. So the standard of practice doesn't speak to downspouts. It's not recognized as a water source. So again, we want it diverted away from the mound, but there isn't a requirement for how far your eaves trough, your downspout needs to be away from it. We just want to be aware and make sure that it's pointing away from the mound, but there isn't a setback requirement. It's not recognized as a water source specifically.
All right, thank you. Yeah, feel free to add your questions into the chat and we can have them answered, or feel free to unmute yourself and ask any questions that you might have.
Hopefully everybody, I didn't put them to sleep.
I have a question that many people might be wondering about. How often should you pump out your septic tank?
Yeah, the rule of thumb is every 3 years, but it just depends if you're experiencing any issues, things like that, but it doesn't have to be done every year. So rule of thumb is every 3 years. You can get it done every year if you want, but it is something that you should be able to do kind of on a cycle, but not annually.
All right, we have another question from Krista. Regarding Marta's question, can you just replace the tank and not upgrade the whole system if you do live in a subdivision?
Yes, sorry, I was just reading. Okay, so this comes up specifically with open discharges because they have a greater setback. As we mentioned, we need a larger parcel of land to have an open discharge. So in those situations, again, this is something to work closely with your municipality on because they may have additional requirements regarding the subdivision process and what they're needing for compliance as well. So that is a factor that plays into this for sure. In those situations, if we're dealing with an existing system, but now there's a setback issue because of a subdivision, that can be addressed through the variance process. So it again very much depends on the circumstances and again in working with the municipality what they're needing, and there are ways to address that. So I don't know if that's necessarily the question. That is something that comes up a lot, but otherwise if the system is existing and we're just changing the tank is it's concrete and disintegrating or whatever the case may be, we can just replace that tank and not replace the entire system if that's all we're dealing with is just simply needing to update a septic tank. If that makes sense.
Okay, we have another question regarding planting anything other than grass on or around the tank or mound, and how far away would a flower bed need to be?
We recommend well, the standard of practice actually requires like a treatment mound to be seeded with grass. But we're looking for things with shallow roots. And so there isn't a setback requirement for a flower bed. Most of our annuals and even perennials aren't dealing with a big root system. It's when we get to the trees and shrubs that those roots and kind of the span on them can become problematic. So with flower beds and things like that, that's generally not much of a concern. Again, just when we're just looking at the root system of them and the impact on our system. So with grasses and things like that, those are fine because they have a very shallow root system. And so we do want that. It helps keeps the soil there and keeps it from blowing away. So yeah, there isn't a requirement for a flower bed, and it's usually not much of a concern when we're dealing with annuals and some perennials.
There's another question from Krista. in the chat. So she says, so our system has the outflow pipe. The property was originally a quarter section, but many years ago was divided and is now 5 acres. We were told that when we replaced the tank that we would have to change amount as well because we are now registered as 5 acre. Do I understand by the previous answer that this does not have to happen?
Sorry, I'm just reading it. So, yeah, so it, like we mentioned before, we need the 10 acres for an open discharge system, which is, I think, what you're speaking to with kind of the outflow pipe, in that it discharges onto the surface. So again, when we're subdividing a property and we're changing that size of the parcel, that can impact the setbacks that we may not be compliant with anymore. And it may require us to make some adjustments to that system. So there are options, a modified open discharge system, but again, those are very site specific and often dealt with through the variance process and also with the municipality. So that specifically might be a very case specific question, because it's not just as, if the setbacks and everything are met, then it should be fine. But when we're subdividing and we now have less than the 10 acres we need for an open discharge, that can potentially create some issues and now need maybe some revisions made to make that system compliant with our new property size that we're looking at. So I know that that's a yes and a no answer, so I'm sorry, Krista, that that's probably not super helpful, but it would be a case by case basis and something to speak to your local safety codes officer about in your municipality to see what your options are in order to potentially gain compliance with your existing system, or what modifications you could maybe make to have compliance, as opposed to maybe just a mound. That there might be some other options in there, but I can't, that's very specific. So I don't want to overspeak not knowing all the details and context. So
Right.
that would be my recommendation.
So the next step would then be to contact the county.
Yeah, I would suggest ensuring that we understand what's being asked from the county and the subdivision. Are they looking for a compliance certificate, and what does that look like? A letter from an SCO, a permit, like what are their concerns, and what is making the system no longer compliant? So then bringing in your safety codes officer to see, okay, what isn't compliant? And so what are my options to get compliance here? So between those two channels working together to understand what the issue is and what your options are.
Okay. We're not actually in a neighborhood. They literally just carved out 5 acres and with the original house and then and sold that off. And now the rest of that quarter section, they built a new house on the far side of it. So our
Yeah.
backup plan was to ask them to buy 5 acres back
Yeah,
because nothing else has changed.
right.
Okay.
Yeah,
We're still hopefully another 5 to 15 years away from having to replace, but something that we want to start saving for.
for sure. I'd consult with a safety codes officer, and again, because there are options with existing open discharges to kind of modify them to make them compliant. So maybe not the case, but again, it's worth having that conversation and evaluating what can be done and what you'd be looking at down the road.
Okay. It sounds like we're not the only one in this situation, so thank you.
Welcome.
All right, so we have another question here from Jackie. If the area between Jackie and the neighbor seems to be continually pooling and wet on top of the ground from their septic, would they contact Alberta Health to check that, or who should they contact?
If it's crossing property lines, then that's Alberta Health would usually get involved. Often they'll defer to the local authority having jurisdiction. So whether that's your municipality and their SCO or an agency. So I would start trying to talk to the municipality if they can work with the neighbor to investigate to see what the issue is, and then Alberta Health may be involved and taking their own enforcement action. But we want to identify where is this coming from, why, and what can we do to stop it. So whether you have that relationship with your neighbor to have that conversation or to find out what the source of that pooling is, whether it is something resulting from a septic system or not, and you can work with the municipality as well to help facilitate that conversation, and then they may get the safety codes officer to conduct a site visit or reach out to Alberta Health to see if that's something that they would consider a public nuisance and get involved. So kind of a few different options there. Alberta Health, it can be very difficult. I have found to try and reach a person and the right person for that area. There's different health officers in different jurisdictions, of course, and so I found that to be challenging, but it's definitely can be something that falls under their act as a public nuisance. But I'd maybe again start with having that conversation and seeing if between yourself and the neighbor municipality, the SCO, if we can get the ball rolling to diagnose what is this and where is it coming from, to then find a path to addressing it.
Great. So we do have another question from Jonathan, wondering if the county has a list of contractors that can repair existing systems. He has a plant and a field which is working, but the concrete balance tank of the plant that houses the pump is deteriorating. He would just want to have the last pump out compartment replaced, and he's finding it hard to find anyone interested in doing that work. Or are there any other options in like relining or the interior surface that's deteriorating?
So any certified installer, we don't have in Alberta a separate specific designation for maintenance person. So really anyone with a certificate of competency is somebody that you can reach out to assist with repairs and maintenance on your system, and then help address to see, is this something that we can repair? What kind of technology do we have available to address this issue? Or is it something that would be more of a replacement? So on AOWMA's website, they have where you can find a professional in your area and put in your area, and it'll show the people that are members with AOWMA and certified contractors that you could reach out to see if they could help you. Again, Alberta Municipal Affairs as well has a list of all the certified contractors in Alberta, and it lists them by their location. And so you can sort them that way. I can pass along the link to both of those websites to find a certified person, and then any one of those people would be a professional who can help with that and work with you. I have seen where they have resealed the interior of tanks, but again, it just depends on the specifics of your system and your tank and what we're looking at there. So I guess in a nutshell, just a certified person, and I can pass along those websites to help find someone in your area.
Great, thank you. And we do have one more question from Marta. Can you build a smaller shed or a gazebo close to the tank? And where would she go for good information for buyers about septic designs to protect herself before purchasing?
Okay, so as far as a building, so a smaller shed or a gazebo would be something with a non-permanent foundation. And so the setback for that in the code, I think, is 1 meter. I don't have my code book with me in this room, but yeah, that would be a non-permanent foundation. So it's the setback is very small for those. Same thing, even if it is a foundation or a basement from a septic tank, is 3 feet. So that shouldn't be an issue. And then information on septic designs to protect yourself. So do you mean in finding a designer to work with to do a design for you, or purchasing a property and wanting information about the design of an existing system?
Hey, I'll unmute and explain. Yes, it's quite hard when you are shopping for property to understand whether you're buying a problem or you're buying actually that's designed correctly, and realtors are not quite certified. So when you even invite in house inspectors, you do need to invite two different people, house inspector and the septic professional. Because house inspector will never calculate distances, will never check maps, how many acres, ask all those questions. So lots of people who want to move from city to county are very concerned and like, where do you find more information?
For sure. And that is a very big gap in the industry. The realtor inspection of it. And like you mentioned, you're investing in this rural property that has an on-site system, but finding your peace of mind as to maybe it was installed for a 3-bedroom and they added on, and so now it's a 6-bedroom home, and you're assuming the system is for 6 bedrooms, but maybe it's not. And so more and more realtors are asking for the permitting documentation as part of the sale. Not always, and it seems to depend from one realtor to the next. So I think as a purchaser, potentially having that conversation with your realtor, whether those are conditions of the sale and things like that, so that you make sure that you have that evidence that this system was permitted, it was inspected, a copy of the design that was approved. And again, those maintenance logs, things like that, those are things as a potential purchaser that you should be aware of and that your realtor can be asking for. Having somebody specifically certified for that. Home inspectors, again, they're looking at the home, and often there's no look at the septic system at all. So that home inspection is great, but it has no bearing on that on-site system and what's there or how it's working. In those situations, again, it would be a certified installer that could come out and do a bit of an investigation to see if there are signs of failure, evidence of maintenance and or any disrepair, things like that. So again, reaching out to a certified installer in your area can provide kind of that real estate inspection specific to a septic field, but also requesting and looking for that documentation of what was installed and were all the proper channels followed, and what was put in there and how has it been used. I don't know if that's helpful, Marta.
Thank you. We also have another question here from Megan, and she's wondering if there's a recommendation for a distance for a fire pit to a septic tank.
Yeah, the code doesn't speak to that at all. So there is no minimum requirement. Again, we don't want to encourage heavy traffic over your system. So, having a fire pit in an area where you're going to have gatherings and things like that can maybe just encourage the potential for that. But otherwise, it's not going into there's nothing that is going to be infiltrating the soil and potentially impacting our system. So that's more of a landscaping preference decision. Yeah, there's no code requirement for you.
All right, thank you. And we have a question from Deanna, and she's wondering, she's also looking at replacing her concrete tank due to the divider breaking down, and she's looking at different systems, but she doesn't have the space to, install something like that for the newer styles that you were talking about. Are there any other designs of tanks instead of replacing it with another concrete tank?
There are different tanks. So there's fiberglass, concrete, plastic, but again, some of those, depending on your water table and things, are more difficult to use. So there's different materials for the tank that you can use. When it starts wearing down, then it is time for replacement. Again, we want to be aware of the condition of our tank so that it's doing its job and holding the effluent, containing that properly. So it's, again, the material, it would be worth speaking to some different suppliers and things like that. There are different materials that you can use. Part of that is preference, cost, longevity, and just for your personal decision as to what the best route for you is going to go. Different systems in your yard. So it sounds like you've got a few limiting factors there when it comes to the installation of a new system. And that's where you can, the advanced treatment units and things like that are giving you a better quality effluent, that can then reduce the size of the soil-based component that you need because you're putting a better quality of effluent into the soil. So you don't need it to work as hard because you're starting with a better product. So something like that, the treatment unit, those can be beneficial in those type of situations when it can reduce the footprint or just help with the design and the space that you're looking at when you're dealing with different limiting factors on a property. So a few options there hopefully for you.
Thank you. And we just have another question from Jane about reducing traffic on the mound, or is it the surrounding area as well? She was just wondering about how far out would you have to reduce the traffic?
Yeah, so the mound, the way it's built, well, literally is a mound. So it can end up being quite wide because you build it up off the ground, but it's also sloped out. And so from edge to edge, it can be quite wide, and then also the length of it as well. So you want to avoid traffic anywhere in that area, like including those kind of slow sloped areas you want to stay off of. And then that's your treatment area. So you want to avoid traffic on the mound at all, like not just on top of it, but including those sloped sides. And then, just use your best judgment. You don't want to be parking right up next to it, but again, there isn't a a rule as far as, X feet away from it, but that whole sloped area is our treatment area that we want to stay away from, but also just using good judgment, and we're not going right up next to it, but it doesn't mean you have to stay, 50 feet away from it altogether. So just some judgment there on your end.
Okay, it looks like that's everything in the chat for now. So we'll just give everyone another few seconds if they have any questions to pop it in or unmute themselves before we wrap up. It looks like that's everything. So thanks everyone for attending. Lots of good information, and thanks so much, Rebecca and Nicole, for being our presenters tonight. Yeah, so just to reiterate, we do have these homeowner packages at our county's community services building. I'll send a follow-up email after this once we have the recording posted on YouTube. It'll just be posted as an unlisted video, so I'll send a link for you to access it that way. And just a heads up, we do have a virtual Working Well workshop coming up. So if any of you were unable to attend that last one we did in person, then that's another option for an online workshop. But other than that, thank you again so much, Rebecca and Nicole, for lots of great information. We really appreciate it. And thanks to everyone who attended tonight. So with that, I think we'll wrap up and hope everyone has a great rest of their evening. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll pass along those two links in regards to finding a professional, the one located pro on AOWMA and then also Alberta Municipal Affairs, so that maybe you could include that in your email too.
Absolutely.
Out to everyone. Okay, perfect. We'll get those over to you, and thank you to our hosts, and apologize for starting off a little bit late here, but appreciate everyone's support and attendance tonight.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Bye.